How's it going, everybody? Dr. Coin back at it again, and welcome to another episode of the Rare and Valuable Coins in Canada. Today we are going to be discussing the most valuable Newfoundland pennies that were made. For those of you that aren't aware, the province of Newfoundland actually produced its own coinage from the year 1865 until the year 1947. When Newfoundland adopted its decimal coinage system in the year 1863, $1 was equivalent to 8 Spanish reals or 483 pounds sterling. Also, a British halfpenny would be worth 1 cent. Between the years of 1863 and 1865, the Royal Mint in London would experiment with several different patterns and designs until eventually they would settle on the official design in 1865, and then its circulating coinage would run all the way up until 1947. So it was the last province to ditch producing its own circulating coinage, and eventually when Newfoundland signed with the Confederation and became part of the rest of Canada, they would eventually start using regular Canadian currency, and the Newfoundland coins would be dispersed out amongst collectors. Because of the high levels of trade and also the popularity in Newfoundland, the mintage of some of these coins is actually pretty high, and the value can also be equivalent to some of the Canadian coins, whether it's a key date or an era variety. Some of these prices are pretty insane, and I think that these Newfoundland coins hold an extremely important place in our Canadian numismatic history. I have a few of them myself, and I think it's very interesting, and it's definitely good to know what to look out for. So today we're going to be discussing the most valuable pennies that you can find between those years of 1865 and 1947. Before I do get into this, I would really appreciate if you guys would hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more coin collecting videos just like this. Before I start this list off, I wanted to make one extremely important note for anyone that does not know, is that the Newfoundland large cent actually ran quite a bit longer than the Canadian large cent. Canadian large pennies ran up until the year 1920, and then they switched the size down to the small penny, and I believe they also switched and altered the design for the Canadian penny. Now the Newfoundland large cent ran all the way up until the year 1937, and the reason that they actually changed it then is because of cost-related concerns. The war was up on the horizon, and they knew that they might eventually need some copper for the war effort, so they reduced the size in an effort to be able to save some money, and obviously it paid off in the end, and it was probably a good choice. And they also changed the design. The reverse design of the Newfoundland small cent features a pitcher plant, which is a plant native to Newfoundland. So we are going to start things off with a nice oldie. This is going to be a Victorian Newfoundland large cent, and it is the year 1880. Now 1880 has a total mintage of 400,000, and there are actually 3 different varieties for the year 1880, and those are as followed. It has an oval O variety, a round O that is level, and a round O that is low. Now, the prices are quite different for all of the different varieties, the most valuable of which is the Oval O, which can fetch you around $800 for a very fine example, and around $9,000 for an MS65 example. Now, the least valuable of these 3 varieties is the round O level variety, which is around $15 for a very fine example, and around $3,000 for an MS65. Now, the other good variety to look for is a lot more valuable on the high end of the Sheldon scale, but not nearly as valuable on the low end, and that is the round O low variety, which is worth around $30 for a very fine example, which is just a little bit more than that other round O variety, and it is worth somewhere around $11,500 for an MS65. So the Oval O is worth around $9,000 at the high end and around $800 at the low end. So just very interesting the way that these grading systems work out for some of these coins. These can all fetch you a nice pretty penny. It's a good date to look for, but if you can score yourself that Oval O or the low round O, then it is definitely a great one. All right, so next up is the year 1885, which is definitely a key date. It has a mintage figure of 40,000. So even for these Newfoundland coins, it is very rare that you see them dip into these very low mintage figures. They usually made a decent amount of them because they were very common to use for trade. There was a lot of people coming in and out of the ports of Newfoundland. So that is a very low mintage figure, and because of that, it can fetch you a pretty good price, which is around $100 for a VF example, and it can go all the way up to around $10,000 for an MS-65 example. Next up is the year 1888, which is actually the next year that they minted pennies after the year 1885, and it is another very low mintage year, around 50,000, and it has a very similar price to that last 1885. It's worth around $100 for a VF example, and it's actually a little bit more valuable on the high end, being worth around $13,000 for MS-65. Next up is the 1904H. Now, just a little bit about mint marks when it comes to Newfoundland coins. You can find two different mint marks. On some of the earlier coins, you will find an H mint mark, which will mean it was struck at the Hedon or Birmingham Mint in England. And you can also find a C mint mark on some of the later strikes of Canadian coins, particularly the ones that were minted between the years of 1937 and 1945. Because during World War II, Newfoundland did not want to risk any of the coins being shipped from London being sunk by German U-boat torpedoes, so they contracted the Ottawa Mint to eliminate some of the risk from coins being lost at sea. Newfoundland was absolutely crucial to Canada during the war effort. We would not have had victory if not for the men and women of Newfoundland being able to deploy from their ports, and they suffered some of the heaviest losses of all of the men and women during World War II. They sacrificed a lot, so I'm sure they definitely did not want to sacrifice any of their coins coming overseas from Britain. I'm sure they lost enough as it was. But it is almost always a good thing when you have different mint marks on coins. It usually means that there will be premiums that come along with them. So the 1904H has a mintage of 100,000. It can be worth around $30 for a VF example and all the way up to $7,000 for an MS-65. So that would have been struck in Birmingham in England. So next up is the 1920C. Now, touching on what I was just saying, this would have been struck at the Ottawa Mint most likely, and this was just struck just a few years after the Ottawa branch of the Mint was actually open. So I don't know if they were utilizing on the Mint's new capability to be able to ship them coins. It might have been a little bit faster for them to be able to get coins from the Ottawa Mint, but it seems like they preferred to do business with the mints in England. But the 1920C, which means Canadian, has a mintage of 302,184. It can go for around $7 for a VF example and all the way up to $4,000 for MS-65 examples. Now we're going to get into a couple of the super notable varieties and errors of the Newfoundland coins, the first of which is the 1940 re-engraved date variety. Now, the total mintage for 1940 is 300,000. It can be worth around $80 for a VF example or around $12,000 for an MS-65 example of the 1940 re-engraved date. The 1941 C mint mark double date variety. 1941C, being struck in Ottawa, has a total mintage of 827,662. It can fetch you around $40 for a VF example and around $10,000 for an MS-65 example of the 1941 C mint mark double date. So it would seem like they were definitely having some problems with their dies in the year 1940 and 1941C. I don't know if the dies were still getting shipped in from the Royal Mint in London or exactly how that was working, but a lot of the World War II coins, both Canadian and Newfoundland, seem to have a lot of problems, double dates, and errors around that time. So next up is a penny that is a pretty good counterpart to the Canadian penny, because some of the World War II Canadian pennies can fetch some crazy premiums, especially in the high MS regions, and this is the 1944 C mint mark Newfoundland penny. Now, surprisingly, the mintage isn't super low for this. It's actually minted at 1,328,776, but one possible explanation is that not too many high-grade examples of this survived. Probably they were used a lot in World War II, heavily circulated, because at the low end of the scale, it's worth around $12 for a VF example, which isn't that crazy. It's not bad for one that's pretty worn and beat up, but it can be worth all the way up to $9,500 for an MS65 example. Usually when you see a huge jump like that, it indicates that the population of very high grade examples of this coin is very low. So not too many MS65 or even mint state examples probably exist of a lot of these World War II era coins. Now, I find the history of Newfoundland to be very interesting. I'm definitely going to make more videos on their coins in the future. We have more denominations to cover. They actually made their own 20-cent pieces. They made 50 cents, 25 cents, dimes, 5-cent pieces. We have a lot to cover in the future. I also want to get a little bit more into the history of Newfoundland coins and tell you guys basically and break down the way that it all works, how they broke apart from the Dominion of Canada, and why it is that they waited so long all the way until 1949 to rejoin up with the rest of Canada. It is a fascinating history. I think it is amazing that we have different coins like this to offer to our hobby. I definitely consider them to be in the branch of Canadian coins, but at the same time, they are a thing of their own, and that is absolutely fascinating. If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, I would really appreciate if you would hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more like this. But other than that, guys, there's not much else for me to say, so make sure to check out the links down in the description if you would like to buy any of my merchandise, apparel, or gear that I use in my videos. Till the next one, everybody, peace out, and have a good one, y'all.